Hey, hey, Carly.
Hi, Ian.
Oh, everybody, welcome back to Intimacy Choreography in Conversation. Today, we have a very esteemed guest. We are so happy to have Laura Rikard with us. She is one of the leading intimacy professionals, founder of Theatrical Intimacy Education, where I took my first class.
Yeah.
So, very, very wonderful and emotionally gratifying for me to have a chance to sit down with you, Laura. I know that when we discussed inviting you to the podcast, we were really interested in knowing not only how you started and where you are now, but also maybe a little bit later, we'll talk about where you feel the field is going, where you feel your future is, and how you're incorporating all of this intimacy world into your life as a practitioner and as a mom. So, I guess what I would like to know first and foremost is what is your origin story?
With this work.
With this particular work, yes, you have so
Yeah.
many origin stories.
I'm a little girl born in a small town. It's true. But
Yeah.
with this work really began for me. I'd been a professional actor since I left college in 1998, finished university. And I always wanted to work with actors, train actors. I was always kind of coaching and working with actors as I was a professional actor. But in 2008, I went back to graduate school at the University of Virginia. And I specifically went there because all of the graduate students also taught the undergraduate theater classes, particularly the acting classes. And it was in those classes I started to really see that we have this power dynamic that exists in the industry where the leader has all the say and the person who which the creative process lives out on doesn't feel empowered to speak up for what they need or feels that because their character is having an awful journey, they need to be having sad days and things around that. And so I wanted to bring more healthy practices for actors in the training process. I wanted to empower them in ways that they could stay vulnerable and exploratory in their work, but they could speak up for what they need and to check in with themselves in the training process. And that work I was calling at the time instilling self-care in actor training. And that led to what is the consent pedagogy of theatrical intimacy education and supporting the boundary pedagogy as well. I became a full time professor in 2012. I was a movement and team professor. And I was putting this work together with the movement work. And I was often being called in as a movement coach to come help out on a scene that just looked really stiff or looked really strange. And it would be the intimacy. And I started to put together what was going on in acting class and what actors weren't connecting from acting class with movement work that would make intimacy more accessible. Because what was often stifling for the actors was this idea of chemistry. I have to really like this person, or I have to really have something going on with them, or I've never moved this way in front of an audience. So I was doing this work when I met Chelsea Pace, who was in graduate school working on the choreographic aspect of it and desexualizing the choreographic aspect of it and putting it into an accessible movement pedagogy. We would present together, get together and talk about our work. We were introduced by Dr. Jason David Scott of the Arizona State University. In 2017, I presented on this work at the Directing Pre-Conference at the Association of Theater and Higher Education Conference. It's called ATHA. Kim Shively, who now runs Theatrical Intimacy Education with me, came up to me at the time and said, "You need to start a company. People need to be able to find you so you can come out and share this work with people." And I was like, "Okay." And well, I mean, literally, I sometimes call, I hope this doesn't offend people, theatrical intimacy education is like my teenage pregnancy, something I was doing for a lot of fun, and it became a whole lot of responsibility.
Love,
But I love it
love.
no matter what. So I approached Chelsea and said, "Hey, do you want to start a company where people can find us and find this work and we can keep building it together?" And she was like, "Sure." And that was as far as we thought it out. We built the pedagogy, we built our first workshops. Chelsea was putting together the notes to eventually write Staging Sex. And the Me Too movement happened. And then when the Me Too movement happened and the industry decided to recognize this work, there
Mm.
were 4 faces that had been speaking about this work or had published on this work. And those 4 faces were Alicia Rodas, Tonya Sina, myself, and Chelsea Pace. And we were really at the right place at the right time. There were plenty of people doing this work. There were female stunt coordinators doing this work in film and television. There were wardrobe people, costume people, people in
Yes.
theater, and the BIPOC community for years have been coming in and doing unpaid labor saying, "Hey, these folks are vulnerable. Let's recognize that." So this work was not happening. It just that we were in a really privileged spot to be there when the fancy big Hollywood industry decided to recognize it. And I think it's important we note that and we note our privilege because we're four white ladies, 3 of us with graduate degrees. So, and those graduate degrees are part of the reasons we were being recognized for this work. But it became really important for TIE immediately, especially because I knew Kaya Dunn. I had at the 2017 conference brought Kaya onto a panel. I invited her to be part of a panel about diversifying the acting classroom. And that's where Kaya and I met. I remember she was pregnant with her youngest son at the time. When we realized very quickly, oh, this is going to be the lens of intimacy could very much fall into the limited perspective of privileged white ladies. We called Kaya and we're like, hey, will you help us? We're going to pay you. They don't know. But Kaya came on then. And since then, we have worked really hard to uplift and have diverse perspectives and voices and researchers and educators giving voice to this work.
That's amazing. Thank you for
Wonderful.
uplifting kind of that moment and right place at right time and why those were the faces that were on this field as it came into the mainstream public eye. And TIE honestly is always where I send folks who come to me and are like, how do I start learning about this? Because there is an accessibility and there was a priority of self-awareness and inclusivity from a really early time that felt authentic with the organization to me, at least from an outside perspective. And so thank you for that. I know you work both in, education, higher education, theater, and also in the professional field. And so I'm curious how those cross pollinate each other, or if you have a speciality or focus, or kind of what your ways into this work are.
My line of research in this work, if we have to focus it in on one lane, is consent-based practices and processes. I'm well versed in all this work and everything TIE teaches because I want to be, but I also have to be. Those are probably my specialities. Being in education and being in the professional field in the United States, where we do not have government funding for the performing arts, those two are not really separated. If university and college theater programs were to go away, we no longer have a theater business in this country. Most playwrights in this country get their rights and royalties off of the university and college productions that happen every year. So we train the people in the industry by training the people going into the industry. And that's really where I've really seen the connect of this work are folks now, because we've been training in universities since 2017, folks coming into the profession right out of university. And their expectation is these tools are being used somehow, some way in the industry, right? And so I think that's been, as far as education goes, I don't see them as separate, but it's been important for me to work in both to make sure that I get on a film set, that I get on a television set once or twice a year. So I am staying up to date with what's happening to bring that to education. It's also interesting when I do that, sometimes I have to bring folks on set up to scale with what this new actor that just got cast and just entered the industry is talking about as well.
How have you found working with actors is when it comes to an understanding of what their boundaries are? Let me clarify. So now that boundary work has been in the curricular system of universities for a few years now, I think starting just before the pandemic and then moving through the pandemic where our college students were faced with learning about theater and learning about movement through little tiny squares, and then coming out of the pandemic back into the classroom, boundaries were something that were a gift to the community. And now what I'm finding is that some actors who have come through this system now are resting well in the center of their boundaries, as opposed to being curious about moving out to the edge of their boundaries. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the resistance there is?
I don't think it's resistance from my perspective. I think it is a confusion of understanding that comfort does not exist in what we do. And so what's happened is as people have tried to facilitate rooms where they encourage the establishment and respect of boundaries, they have equated that with comfort. And theater and film and television is not about comfort. It is about poeticizing the most uncomfortable moments of characters' lives. I don't want you to be comfortable with Hamlet's uncle killing his father and marrying his mother. I'd be concerned if you were. I need to know if it works within your boundaries to tell that story. I never ask an actor, are you comfortable doing a kissing scene? Are you comfortable kissing
Mm.
anything? I don't think they are in front of strangers every night. My
Why
question
would
is,
you be?
does it work for, are you willing to work through the professional discomfort of this? Does that work for your boundaries to do that? If your boundary is no, I don't ever want to kiss someone ever in front of an audience, then, that's one thing. If it is, yeah, I can kiss any actor you put in front of me. Is it the most comfortable thing? No. But can I do it because it's part of my job description? Yeah, that's fine. Right. And
Yeah.
that's working within your boundaries. Right. So we have to, I think folks forget when we're dealing with this work is we're dealing with a product and process oriented field. We're not talking about your comfort level on a date. We're not talking about your boundaries on a date that nobody's paying to watch you. We are talking about we got to get a story that an audience has consented and paid sometimes a lot of money to see. And so here is what we have to ask of you. It is not comfortable to ask actors to imagine given circumstances, to imagine their character is dying, to dig from their own truth. None of that is comfortable, but it is the method and process of the job that we do. And so the question for me is, are the tools that we have helping you work through this professional discomfort, but still helping you stay within your boundaries?
Mm.
And I think what happens, especially as we know the myelination process of the brain has slowed down. We can thank Kim Shiley for bringing this research. And if you're interested in reading about this, you can go to the Annie E. Casey Foundation. But if you scan the average 18-year-old brain today, it is matured at the rate of the 14-year-old brain in 2010.
That's
So
real.
that's real. I feel it very much as a college professor, having taught since 2008. We also have to think about if we haven't introduced boundaries as boundaries are fluid, boundaries can change. Boundaries are here to help you work through professional discomfort and a product and process field that still lives out on the human body. If we don't introduce the complexities in which we need to know the boundaries so we can creatively work with them, then I can see where someone might just be like, no, this is my boundaries and you'll have to work with it or what.
Yeah.
To me, that
Yeah.
would be like a heart surgeon saying, I don't like blood. And y'all, but if you want me to do the heart surgery, then you have to put up with a surgeon who isn't going to be in a room with blood.
Kind of impossible. Thank you for outlining that. I'm going to ask an additional question for facilitators and for educators out there that run into students and actors who do put up um, a questioning or a hardline boundary or a I don't like blood, quote unquote, kind of perspective of their characters. How do you counsel instructors and directors in dealing with that?
Well, every situation is different. It's hard to say here's the blanket answer, right? Because you've got to look at every situation. But I think, with acting classes, I would say it's a class. They don't want to do a scene with cuss words in it. Give them a scene without cuss words. They want to do a scene that has a kiss, but they don't want to do a kiss. Use a placeholder. Use placeholders anyway. It's acting class. I think
Yeah.
if they want to use a placeholder word, just make sure they understand that, yeah, we can use a placeholder word for this word in acting class in the script because nobody's paying to see it, but explaining to them. But if you did the professional production, you would have to say that word, right?
Yeah.
You would have to be open to doing that. So I think explaining like the differences of what this is how I can honor that in this room. As a director, I would say the more upfront, the more clear we can be about expectations and casting, the more we can explain that. Because the big fear for actors is if I'm honest about my boundaries, I'll never get cast again. And so something that I consistently train is actually professional actors, really good actors. It is a sign of maturity to me. And
Yes.
if you just say, I don't want to audition for this because this doesn't work for me, I will tell you, I can't wait to see you at the next audition.
Yeah.
Yeah. It speaks to self-awareness and somebody who's a good communicator with their collaborators,
Yeah.
who's giving them the info that they need.
I just directed Rent, and even though I had given them all the information on a, you know, casting sheet when they came to audition, the callbacks, I said, I need to reiterate what this story is.
Mhm.
I need to reiterate how we're staging it. I need to reiterate the time commitment. If you cannot do that, this is not going to be a process that you're going to function well in
Yeah.
because I can't change any of it.
Right.
Because what people forget is consent-based process isn't just working for the person for what they consent to. Consent-based process is fully informing people of what you can support them in and what you cannot support them in.
Mm.
And so by letting them know, like, I can't have a process where people can't be at rehearsal. We can't change this storyline or this text. I
Yeah.
had people come up and say, "Thank you so much. I can't do this." I said, "Great. I can't wait to see you at auditions in the fall. We also
Mm.
have these other opportunities here, here, and here." So you said teachers, directors, who else, Anne?
Teachers, directors, stage management, how do they play how does their role after the director's gone and the show is up, how do we support those people kind of on the front lines of the theater process? How do we support their work in the room
Yeah.
in
Well,
in keeping in keeping the choreography intact and keeping the consent-based environment intact?
I think making sure they know what's within the scope of their skill set to handle and
Mhm.
encouraging them to ask for help when they realize it's not. Like with short run productions, regional theater, college productions, and when I'm contracted, I say, y'all can change this choreography if you need to, as long as everyone is consenting. Any small moves, as it finds its pace and its rhythm. If a drastic thing comes up, please call me and let me help you. I empower them when I'm there, like to check in with the stage manager to if they need to shift boundaries, here are some options. So I think that's different on Broadway where we're talking about intellectual property rights and everything else, and where they have to check in with every creative person on the team for every little change. But I think, also reminding them what is their job and what they are there to handle and when they need to go to someone else whose
Yeah.
lane that is. I think people often at the front line think they have to have the fix all right away because the show has to go on, right? Sometimes you might have to say, can we get through tonight's show, but we will deal with this tomorrow? Is that an option? That might have to be the agreement we come to for tonight. That's not ideal, but that might be what has to.
I so appreciate just holding all of this with the nuance of a specific situation and that there is not one way to always show up for this
Yeah.
and also naming like that these quote unquote soft or emotional interpersonal skills are skill sets that actors need if you're working in a collaborative environment. It makes me think of two things. One, just the informed consent of it all, that like when you like you were talking about auditions, like when you empower people with all that information, like they have clear expectations. There is so much less likelihood for issues to come up. I mean, shit always comes up. That's part of it. But like, we will run into less like conflict and problems and people feeling like they have to or might be, encouraged to go against some of their own boundaries when they have this clear expectation
Because
going in that this is the process, this is the story, this is the content.
I think the confusion with this work is not just intimacy work, but this, thinking about power dynamics, thinking
Mm,
about consent-based practice, respecting boundaries across the whole. I think the confusion is that people think then it makes it a hunky-dory process where no one ever has any bad feeling. No, what it does is it gives us more tools to deal with constructive conflict that
mm,
happens in consent-based processes, that
yes.
happens when you're dealing with emotional artists. Like, it's never going to be a hunky-dory process no matter what. Someone's going to get stressed out. Someone's going to get up. You could take every tool from every organization that's teaching this work. You could instill it perfectly, whatever that means, and an actor could still have a bad night.
Yes.
100%. I walk into rooms and I say, acting is one of the only professions where your emotional intelligence is a commodity in the room.
Mm,
And it is something that you give over and something that you have to gauge and something that you have to be very aware of when you're walking into creating the human tapestry for a group of people that are sitting in a dark room. You have to give over your emotional currency in order to tell the story. So how can we make sure your bank is full? How can
That's
we
right.
make sure that what you're doing on a nightly is refilled and is readjusted to full so that you can come in and deliver this story every night?
yeah.
And actors who have thought about that, who do that, who have a skill set, actors who can even push up against their boundaries, maybe even cross their boundaries in the work, but get themselves back into what's Dr. Dan Siegel calls the window of tolerance. That's technique. Like what you're talking about is technique. And this is why what I recognized was in the history of actor training, we push actors to find how they get to these truthful, large emotional places. But historically, we haven't been putting in how do you reset?
100%.
The
Yes.
reset is it's just as much technique as it is knowing how to like wail and cry on cue, right?
Yeah.
Being able to come back to a place of like, I'm here, I'm centered now. What's the next scene?
Talk
Yes.
to us
Or
about deroling. Talk to us about that because I learned that from you.
because I invented the one everybody talks about.
I know.
I'm done with my days of not owning myself.
No,
Yes.
I
Own
credit
it.
you with derolling and the spelling of it all the time.
De-rolling came from it started in 2008 when I was an instructor at University of Virginia. And we were doing these AB scenes, just those AB scenes you do in a class. But they were so good. Did these creative, high stakes ABC. And one day these students did this very emotional scene. And then we sat down and we talked about it. And then class was almost over. And as they were leaving, one of them said, well, I'm going to have a really, maybe have a really bad day now because that just took so much of me. And then, I'm going to be sad till next week because I got to do the scene again next week. And I was like, no, no, you've read a lot of bad method acting stuff. Come here. And I was like, you can be a very happy, functioning person and play characters going through some really rough things. So tell me what you did. Tell me what your character did. And they took me through their character's journey. And I said, now tell me what you did to show them. And they're like, well, I imagined our story and I learned my lines and I listened to my scene partner and they just talked through I thought about this thing that happened in my life once for this. So they were talking about substitution and they weren't the most articulate, but they just talked it out. And I started using this more and more. And I called it de-role. When I came to intimacy work, I found that folks appreciated it. Sometimes I would have actors come to me and say, I think I'm falling in love with my scene partner. And I would take them through de-rolling. And they were like, oh, yeah, I'm not in love. It's just my body's getting confused because I'm hugging them and saying, I love you. I was like, yep. And then like all theater people, we try something and then we go, why did it work? I went to therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists and said, why does this seem to have a positive effect?
Hmm.
And they likened it to asking someone in grief counseling to talk through what they're going through, but what they are doing to get through each day. And they said it's actually the saying out loud of it that's sort of helping clarify the physiological confusion in the body. And so that's where it came from. That's where it developed from. And then, and I saw where like, but wow, has some similar practices to it. And
Mhm.
there's other people out there that have done some similar things. But the one that's sort of rooted in intimacy that TA's been talking about, that's where it came from.
Wow.
Brilliant.
I just so appreciate everything you've done for the de-romanticizing of suffering for your art outside of the work. Because I think that especially is like lionized in Hollywood, and especially like young actors can really internalize that toxic method. And like, that's also not craft. If you are like manipulating and stimulating yourself, or like pushing the wound 24/7 outside the work, your nervous system will burn out. And so
Yeah.
it's such a gift to so many actors. I mean, actors that I've worked with as a director or intimacy director, like, de-rolling it changes lives.
It
So thank
does.
you so much for that.
Tell people after the show, this is first read through or the meet and greet, when I have an opportunity to talk with a cast, I do introduce this concept of derolling. And I also say, my goal as a facilitator of this sensitivity or this intimacy is to lead you toward a place where you feel better about yourself after the show than you felt before you started the show.
Yeah.
Mm.
And derolling is a big, big part of that. So just as a community representative, I would like to thank you for introducing that into the industry.
I'm glad it's useful.
More than
Unbelievably
useful.
useful. There are
It's
so many people that use it.
revolutionary.
It is revolutionary. My husband's an actor, and when I first introduced him to de-rolling, it it was such a game changer. Like, all of my favorite people are actors. I love actors so much,
And
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 they do something really special and
yeah.
really vulnerable and embodied, and they deserve to have the tools not just to enter that space, but also to exit that space.
Mm.
I know actors who'll do it before they go on stage. I
Mm.
know actors who like to journal it. I like to see how they own it and take it and own it themselves, that they're not leaning into anybody to lead it.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, David Gonzalez here, one of the producers at Intimacy Choreography and Conversation. What a powerful way to close part one of our conversation with Laura Rikard, hearing about the origins of de-rolling and how it's become such an essential tool for actors and the sustainability of this work. But there's so much more ahead. In part two, we dive into Laura's work with the Theatrical Intimacy Education and growth of their faculty in the innovative workshops that are shaping the future of this field. Make sure you're subscribed and following us wherever you listen or watch so that you don't miss it. Part 2 is coming up next week.